All right. Hello, everybody. My name is John, and today we're going to be going over a technical interview prep class. So we hope that you have a notebook by your side so you can take some notes and that you find this session valuable too. All right. So what we're going to go over is our intro to Outco, technical interview stages and prep, Outco's job search checklist preview, and how to whiteboard effectively with Carlos. Before anything, my name is John Brian Canela, and my purpose is to inspire people to see the light that they have within themselves and to empower them to realize their fullest potential. I graduated from the New Jersey Institute of Technology with a degree in IT network security and a minor in business. I work here at Outco as a career coach, helping software engineers get to where they want to go in their careers. I also work as an IR consultant at Mandiant, focusing on computer forensics and incident response as a service for companies who've been breached by cyber attacks. Prior to working at Outco and Mandiant, I was working at Cisco Systems in San Jose, California. And we have Carlos.
Thanks, John. As mentioned, my name is Carlos Castillo. I went to the Rochester Institute of Technology, but I'm currently pursuing my master's at UMass Lowell with a focus on IT and network security. I currently work at a startup called the Diversity Dashboard. And you know how it is with this startup, you wear multiple hats, but I tend to focus mostly on QA marketing. And I'm also working at Outco as a technical coach where I help engineers get their dream jobs.
Awesome. Thanks, Carlos. All right, so first question, what is your biggest job search roadblock? Now, it's normal to have roadblocks in the journey. And the thing is that it's just part of life, right? We can't let these roadblocks stop us. So what are roadblocks? Roadblocks can be something like technical skills gap, having auto rejection emails when we're applying to a position. Maybe we don't really understand the interview process, or we have a wrong approach. It's important to understand that our values do not decrease based on someone's inability to see our worth. So a no does not mean that it's a no forever. And it doesn't mean that there's something necessarily wrong with you. Maybe we just need to tweak some things. So other parts of the roadblocks could be something that's going on in our minds or our thoughts, where we have negative self-talk and we feel like we're not qualified or we can't do something. So I want to reiterate that it's normal to feel these types of things, like fear of rejection, fear of annoyance, lack of self-esteem, lack of productivity, or imposter syndrome. These are normal things, but we need to know that having these thoughts are not going to help us. So what we do at Outco is we help people get to the next level by removing these thoughts from their minds. So we here at Outco have worked with over 2,000 software engineers, resulting in better paying jobs, 35% average increase, so ranging somewhere between 90,000 to 150,000, depending on the position that engineer is going into. And before we start applying, we need to know the technical interview stages that set us up for success. So I'd say step 0 is self-reflection. And we're going to go over the other ones here on this list. So developing a deep understanding, we need to develop a deep understanding of the role. So what are the core responsibilities? Is it front end or back end? Is it leadership? How would my previous experience allow me to flourish in this new role that I'm applying to? So the team, why does the team actually exist? What's the mission of the team? That's usually in the job description. Connecting with people that are on the team that you're looking to build relationships with. These will help us get a better understanding. For the manager, we need to do our research. So researching the manager on LinkedIn, how long has the manager worked at the company? What does his LinkedIn summary say about his interests? Maybe find some commonality, some common ground. The department for software engineering, how critical is this department for the overall success of the company? We can look at things like Glassdoor, the company website, again, using LinkedIn as a resource. The business impact. So how critical is the role in general? What about the team? How does it help with the success of the overall company. Developing a deep understanding of this will naturally build confidence, and that's going to help you during the phone screening and during the interview. It's also going to help you ask great questions at the end of the interview when that's approaching towards the end. All right, so we need to move from the perception of problem to be solved to problem solver. So let's reset our focus and look at the bigger picture. We need to go into interviews thinking less about the individual problems that need to be solved and think from the perspective of being that solution that a person or a company is looking for. So remember, we are problem solvers. So being a problem solver is part of our DNA, and knowing this about ourselves, verbalizing it, writing that down is going to help build that confidence going into it. So because being a problem solver is part of our DNA, it's how we add value, and it's why the company is looking to hire us. I say, I have a friend, her name is Giselle Ruiz, and she works as a global talent acquisition individual at TikTok. And one of the quotes that she said in one of her recent podcasts was, you need to go into conversations with the mindset that they are lucky to have you. We bring so much fire, so much tenacity. We've overcome barriers, adversity. We've juggled multiple things in our personal and professional lives. We are excelencia, or excellence, in every single way, shape, or form. And we contribute so much to organizations way beyond the day-to-day responsibilities of that job. So when you go into these conversations, truly knowing that and knowing your worth and what you're bringing to the table, to that organization, we need to know that that's it's what we bring to these organizations is much greater than what they're actually giving to us. So when we go into these conversations, that'll give us the confidence to ask for that salary that we want, to talk about how we bring value to the organization in a powerful way with a good tone and good posture. So when I heard that from her, I was like, man, drop the mic. That's amazing. So just know that you're a problem solver and they need you more than you need them. All right, so basic criteria for hiring. What every interview process is designed to understand about you is how you add value. So why it's trying to figure out why we do things. So what is our motivation? How do we do things? What's our values or our culture fit? What do we know and what do we do? So our technical knowledge and experience. What we can or will do. So what is our potential to add value to the company? Being able to honestly answer these questions will give you the content for communicating your worth, your potential, and ultimately communicating with confidence. And these are the same questions you should also be prepared to answer during an interview. So as we reflect, if we don't understand our values and how we add value, how can a company trust us to add value to them? So these are important questions to be able to understand about ourselves and to be self-aware about. All right, moving to application. So when we apply, we have to submit a resume, and I'm sure there's been times where we submit a resume and we just don't hear back from them. And a lot of times it's because the resume that we submit just isn't good. So these are some examples of what a bad resume would look like. So they probably have something like listing their course load, not using proper bullet points, not talking about like the projects. So here I see that the resume is very cluttered. It's not one page because it goes on to the next page. So these are things to focus on, like things not to do. We don't want there to be multiple pages in a resume because typically a recruiter will look at a resume for 7 seconds tops. So you don't want you want them to look at your resume, know exactly what you worked on and how you add value, so that the recruiter has some talking points to talk to the hiring manager about. So here's an example of a good resume. You can see here that you have the bullet points at the top with technical skills, and the technical skills are related to the job description. You clearly see the professional experience. If they have recent projects, that's all the way at, at the bottom, and they have their education at the bottom as well. And their name is clearly defined at the top with their LinkedIn profile, their GitHub, and they could even have a portfolio on the top as well. So this is an example of what a good resume would look like. All right, so applying online. Be mindful of the job search black hole. So when you apply to a ton of places and never get a response, that's essentially what that black hole is. And it's usually, like I said before, because the resume is lacking, or maybe it's too many people are applying to the same role. So the average recruiter looks at a resume for top 7 seconds. And the reason behind that is because the average recruiter is looking at over 600 resumes and having over 20 phone calls per week. So they don't have time to look at multiple pages and seeing a resume that isn't really clear to read. And they'll likely, even if you're a great candidate, they'll look on to the next application. So don't let a resume block you from getting that job that you want. All right, so along with a resume, it's important to not only just blindly apply to positions. Reverse recruiting is something that we here at Outco stress a lot on. And that's reaching out to people, it's the process of being your own recruiter and reaching out to people either on LinkedIn or via email so that you can start developing those relationships. Reverse recruiting is an approach focused on building relationships that can serve you in the short term and ultimately result in getting a new job. So here you can see Jay Pham. He's a recruiter at Google, and you can tell that he wants to meet you. And the reason you could tell is because you can see that it says, "Let's connect" right in his profile header. And you can find him and a lot of people that are just like him via a quick LinkedIn search. And you can read his about page. You can see where he went to school. You could do your research, find some common ground to eventually reach out and connect. Add a note when you try to connect with them, and then mention how you would add value. Maybe talk about a commonality of him that you saw that you have with him via the profile, and that'll help him differentiate you versus everybody who just clicks connect and doesn't really add a personal touch. Another thing to mention here with reverse recruiting is that recruiters aren't the only people that you should be reaching out to. You can also reach out to software engineers because they are incentivized to do referrals. Many times for positions, for software engineering roles, depending on the role itself and what the need is, a referral bonus for an employee that's referring somebody from the outside could be somewhere around $5,000, $10,000 for that individual. So when you reach out and you develop that relationship with a software engineer and they actually refer you, they want to refer you. So don't think that you're bothering them by reaching out to them via LinkedIn. All right, so next we'll go over the phone screen. So what does a typical recruiter screen look like with a phone screen? During a phone or video conference interview, you'll likely be speaking with a potential peer or a manager. So for software engineering roles, discussions will generally last around 30 to 60 minutes. And when answering coding questions, you'll talk through your thought process while writing code in a Google Doc that you'll probably share with your interviewer. So we recommend that you're using hands-on or you're using a hands-free headset where you can use your speakerphone or you could type freely, you could write things down freely. For all other types of roles, discussions will usually last between 30 to 45 minutes. So be prepared for behavioral or hypothetical questions or case-based questions that cover a role related knowledge or your expertise. All right, so this is actually one of my favorite quotes by Maya Angelou. It says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." So when answering interview questions, we are essentially providing proof of our competencies and our fit through examples that we tell in the stories that we tell. So we need to tell compelling stories that are memorable. And even if they don't write every single detail down of what you did, they'll remember how they felt as they were listening to your story. So how do we make sure that we tell a compelling story? Is probably the next question that you have. The way that we can tell compelling stories is by being specific through our response and providing proof through an example that aligns of our competencies. The STAR method is actually what allows us to give descriptive answers and be able to answer the questions like the who, what, where, when, why, how. These are all things that the recruiter is trying to know as they answer the question, as you're answering your question. So I'm gonna quickly go through the STAR method here. The situation. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So situation is your time and place. So the situation of where when you're giving your answer, talk about where, what the situation was, the time and place it occurred. For task, what is it that you were assigned, and what was the issue at hand? That's what the recruiter wants to know. For action, what was the specific action that you took in particular? And then what was the result of the action? Providing some specific measures, some outcomes, maybe talk about metrics. If there's a dollar amount that you could bring to the result, that's also an added plus, something that you could use to tie it all together. That's going to help you answer the question fully and prevent you from just having a one word reply. All right, so when you see this picture, what do you see? I'd say like a common theme is interacting with interviewers is something that requires confidence and self-awareness. So when we're looking at this image, what this image is reflecting is a lot of times when we are connecting with others, we are usually dealing with a projection that we have of ourselves. And that's being reflected through the other person. So there's this quote that says, "My perception of you is often a reflection of me." And the reason why I share this is because oftentimes what's happening here is that there's some lack of confidence under the surface. So if we're more confident in our abilities, we would be less intimidated by other people. Now, confidence can present itself in the way that we speak to ourselves, the way that we write our resumes, the way that we do phone screenings, how we communicate effectively during an interview, how we interact with others, negotiate our salaries, deciding if we're ready to pursue a different programming language. And it's important also to know that bias happens. So bias in regards to like our voice, the tone, how we speak, all of that stuff is super important. And sounding confident is also important. So the reason why I'm constantly driving confidence here is that it's a real thing. People will sometimes choose not to move us forward, even if we have all the technical skills, even if we answer the questions semi-correctly, they might not even move us forward just because of the way that we sound and the way that we're actually delivering. So making sure that we work on this stuff is super crucial. The way that I personally like to work on it is through thinking of positive affirmations, reflecting on how we got to where we are today, knowing that we made it so far, even to reach this moment where we are at this interviewing stage. Believing in our abilities and empathic journaling helps us know what our worth is. I'm gonna go back to this slide here. So when we're doing the STAR method, we're actually speaking about a story and trying to let the interviewer know how we provide value in a certain scenario. So if, let's say you're asked the question, what would your most recent manager say about you, right? A mediocre response would probably be, my manager would say that I'm a good team player. And then, you kind of just like leave it at that. Now that's not really, you're not really saying much there. And you're not really using the STAR method either. So a more compelling answer would probably be, one of my most recent managers at X company would likely say I'm an excellent team player because, right, that's your situation. Because recently I was working with the sales team and my colleagues were split on how to proceed with a sales strategy to win new business. This was negatively affecting our ability to move forward. And knowing that the deadline was near, I presented a new strategy that signed on 50 additional business clients by the end of the year, increasing sales by 20%. And as a result, implementing my idea also saved a number of my colleagues from being let go. So there you go. That's a very well-rounded answer to the question. So in this example, we included measurable results, which help the interview understand the impact that we made in this scenario. And we want to incorporate this in any detailed information to qualify and quantify the real impact that we made in that particular scenario. So using the STAR method helps us communicate with confidence. All right. So going to 3, technical screen. So how many of us have failed these questions? I know it could be nerve-wracking where we've worked super hard to get the skills that we've acquired, and we want to make sure that we can answer the questions that are given to us. So technical screening part is definitely a huge part of the interviewing process. All right, so Carlos is actually going to be speaking a little bit about this. So I'll let Carlos take it away from here.
Yeah, thanks, John. So in regards to the technical screening, a lot of the times, if you're interviewing at one of the top companies, you can actually ask for a free coaching call. And this is basically where they walk you through what to expect during the interview and what you should study for. But let's say you're not interviewing for one of the bigger tech companies, a great resource would actually be interviewing.io. So basically you can practice interviewing with engineers from Google, Facebook, and etc. And the best part is it's all anonymous. So you don't have to worry about leaving a bad impression if you don't do so well. You get better at algorithmic and system design problems. It can also even help you find a job or just see if you still have what it takes to pass tech screen. Also, with the general format of interview process, a lot of the times you'll have a intro question that is more of an interpersonal rather than technical question. Something like, what are you working on? Or sometimes even, what have you done recently? Or what's new in your life? A lot of the times people tend to think that's an excuse to talk about what they're doing with their pet, their partner, or whatever. But actually, you have to remember that this interview is all about demonstrating whether or not you're a good fit for this company. So rather use as an opportunity to further highlight why you're a good fit for this team or for this role. So talk about what you're learning or working on. Talk about the languages, the projects, etc. Right? That's going to demonstrate your value to the recruiter. And yeah, usually they'll give you a sample text problem, like given a list of integers, find the frequency of some target. So that's the general format, the interpersonal and then the technical. So remember, always use STAR with the technical, and with the interpersonal, you can still use STAR if you want to, but try to make it specific to the role that you're talking about. I always tell clients to think in terms of values, characteristics, or skills that you have, right? Because companies and teams always say like, this is what we value, right? So if you do that research and you know what's coveted over there, you can use your interpersonal question to speak to that. If you know what specific technology stacks they're working with, again, you can highlight that. If they're looking for specific traits in a worker, like someone who's a fast learner or whatever, those are the characteristics that you should highlight. So remember to try and think in terms of those 3 things, right? Skills, characteristics, and values. So as far as like major keys to walk away from, always talk about the current code that you're currently writing, right? Ask questions to demonstrate understanding of the problem. And we'll touch upon this more when we get to the stages of whiteboarding. You should always determine constraints, edge cases, and highlight the optimal solution, right? Even if you don't know like how to code it, it's still better than saying nothing at all, right? So always be communicating. And at the end of the day, no matter how brilliant your communication style was or your explanation of the problem was, your code has to compile, right? So always make sure it's able to run.
Awesome, thanks. Great stuff, Carlos. All right, so next steps. So boom, congrats, you made it to the interview, right? You made it through the interview. There's things that the hiring manager and committee is going to be evaluating. And let me just quickly go through all these. All right, so the things that they're going to be evaluating. So for the tech screening performance, it's like, did your code actually compile? Was it optimized? Were you easy to communicate with? For the phone screening, how did you actually perform relative to others? For the resume, how did you perform? Or for the resume, it's like, how did you stand from the competing applicants? Was your resume easy to read for the beginning? And also, how did your experience with regards to everybody else who applied, what did you stand out? Essentially, what they're looking for is analytical skills, coding skills, communication, and experience. So again, the reason why we mentioned the STAR method is because this allows you to fully answer the question and allow you to communicate in a way where the recruiter on the other side will better understand these things about you. All right, so for on-site interviews. So for on-site interviews, the format is usually 45 to 60 minutes. And it's an interview with usually a 1 hour lunch break. I know nowadays we're not really going inside the office, so expect that it's going to be virtual. Typically it's going to be on a whiteboard via Google Doc or something like CoderPad. You can use pseudocode as a crutch if you don't fully know how to code it, but we actually suggest that you don't, because if you can actually code it right then and there, it's going to really look good on your capabilities. Also for coding, do you know your data structures and algorithms well? That's something that you probably need to expect during an interview. Also, there's usually a system diagram that you need to do, so know about that as well. And there's also going to be domain-specific questions that are going to be sprinkled throughout during the interview. Maybe something about a specific coding language that is going to be heavily used for that role. All right, so for committee, the hiring committee, what they're going to be assessing, they're going to be thinking, okay, are we going to do an offer or are we going to reject? They're going to be evaluating your on-site performance. They're going to look at your technical screen performance, phone screen data that's gathered, your resume, where you in there via an internal referral. They're going to be looking at that too. That adds weight. So it's one of the reasons why we recommend reverse recruiting, because internal referrals, typically when you have an internal referral, that person is going to vouch for you. Even if you didn't 100% answer everything, that person inside the company will probably be like, look, I know this person didn't maybe answer this 100%, but I know that with a little bit of coaching, he could get there or she could get there. So definitely reach out to people on LinkedIn to get those referrals down. So yeah, you might get feedback at this point. It depends on the recruiter. So just know that there's sometimes where you don't hear anything back at all. I know that doesn't always feel good, but just know that that's not something against you. It's usually because they're extremely busy on their end and they have a ton of people that are applying to these positions. So they pass on not giving feedback. All right. So with regards to salary negotiations, we recommend using the site levels.fyi. Outco's conservative recommendations are that for typical junior level roles, they usually come in around a 100K range, mid-level is around 130K, and senior is about 160K, plus or minus a few thousand here and there. That's like super general, but again, do your research. You can look at salaries.com, Glassdoor, and levels.fyi if it's for one of those top tech companies. All right, we also have, so for Outco's job search checklist, we got to check, do I understand the technical interview process? Have I practiced my technical interview? Have I built deep confidence and practiced my interview communication skills? These are all things that we here at Outco help the people who apply and become part of the program. We help you go through each part of this checklist to make sure that you can pass interviews with flying colors. All right, so appreciate you taking a time to take a look at how the interviewing process is. I hope you were able to get something out of it. And now we're going to transition to whiteboarding with Carlos, and we'll just take it away from there.
Hi, thank you, John. So yeah, we'll be going over how to whiteboard effectively, just because we feel that oftentimes that's the most stressful part for our clients, is that they just don't know how to deal with that well. So I'm going to give you a system that'll help you not only cope with the stress of this all, but also give you a good way to stay on track on the technical side of things. So for this part of the presentation with your notebook, I want you to have one page that's just for general thoughts or notes that I make, and the other page that you're going to divide into like 4 sections. So that's really important. So your notes match along with the presentation. It'll make sense as we go along. So how many of you in the audience might have had to actually go through a whiteboarding process? I want you to try to remember some of the feelings that you maybe might have experienced. A lot of the clients that we've had said that they felt something of a combination of like nervousness or even fear, confusion, defeat. And it's a little dissonant when you think about what you're going to do on your day-to-day, right? Where you're building applications, creating new features, maintaining code, fixing bugs. But in the interview process, you'll be asked something like inverted binary tree or some other thing that you've never actually had to work on in your career, right? So we always tell clients that the interview process is the performative one, right? So companies are actually looking to gauge 2 things: how you communicate, so your communication style, and how you process problem solving, like what steps you go to in order to solve something. So with communication, it's important to remember that just getting the answer doesn't matter. I don't know if any of you might have taken like one of those like AP stats classes in high school where, your calculator would do all the work and would give you the right answer, but that never got you full credit. You have to actually explain why you were confident in your answer, right? This is pretty much the same thing. You should always be in constant contact with the recruiter as you're going throughout the whiteboard process and letting them know what your thought process is, so that everyone's on the same page. And with problem solving, they specifically want to see how you react when you're under pressure and how you still communicate with your teammates while you're facing this problem together, right? So having a system to approach this part of the interview process can really help you with coping with the negative emotions that you might have felt before. So yeah, let's just go along. So the 4 steps to whiteboarding, and this is where I want you on that second sheet of paper with those 4 sections, you can just write as the title each one of these steps. So they're understand, diagram, pseudocode, and then code. So before we actually get into the 4 steps, I want those in the audience that have whiteboarded before to take a second to reflect and think about and answer this honestly within yourself, whether or not you jump straight to code, right? So a lot of people tend to do this, but as you can see, coding should always be the last step. Now everyone's like, why? I don't understand that this is a technical screen. Because you're setting yourself up for failure if you start right away with code. Because now not only are you going to create an algorithm, you're also going to have to do it while you're managing a code base. And you'll see what I mean later. So yeah, let's get started with the 4 steps. So understand. Intuitively, that sounds like, oh, you should understand the problem, but this is a really important step. You should spend a lot of time on this step. You should ask clarifying questions that give you a sample input and output. If you don't understand the problem, right, there's no way you're going to know how to solve it. So don't go to the next steps until you fully understand this problem, right? So this is also important too, because again, they're gauging you on problem solving and how you communicate. So this is how you can showcase your communication when you're facing a problem with someone else, right? List out any edge cases or anything else that you can think of that'll help you in understanding this problem and write that down, right? Maybe you also might not understand some of the words or concepts. For example, one of the sample whiteboard questions that we have our clients work on is making a base 10 to hexadecimal converter. And a lot of people have heard of hexadecimal and they know it has something to do with base 16, but not everyone understands like how the numbers are represented, right? So it's perfectly acceptable to ask your recruiter like, hey, I understand what you're looking for, but what does this one term mean? Or I'm not really too sure on this one specific part of the question. Ask those clarifying questions. It's okay to do that, right? So remember, people tend to move on too quickly, but this step is all about gathering data, reconnaissance, right? And that's important in solving the rest of the problem. So the next step is diagramming. So you should use simple and clear variables in order to demonstrate how your algorithm proceeds chronologically. You should be able to step through that as if you were the computer itself, right? And communicating as you're going through the steps to the recruiter. So this is useful because what if your approach is wrong, right? And going through it step by step, you'll see where the flaw in your line of reasoning might have been. And it also then helps the interviewer see what kind of path you're going down and maybe give you a tip in correcting your approach in case you're a little bit off base. So for example, a lot of the times when you're writing these diagrams down and you're realizing like, oh snap, this is the wrong thing, it's okay to pivot if necessary, right? Like this is not written in stone. You can erase or add on as you need to, right? So that's why the step is so powerful, because you're not committing to a particular solution yet. So specifically in times of the pandemic, a lot of people also ask like, how does this work? The diagramming portion. How does this work now that, you know, we're not going in person and stuff? And we tell people that there's two things that we think they should practice. One is getting really comfortable with ASCII art. For those of you that aren't familiar with ASCII, it's just a system of like all the letters that we use on our keyboard, right? So I don't know if you've ever seen those like drawings or art where people make like, I don't know, Mario using like hash signs and dollar signs and slashes, right? So you should be able to, for example, be comfortable with maybe just demonstrating a tree via ASCII art, right? Like using slashes to demonstrate where like they bifurcate or something. Also, there's virtual whiteboard apps. There's a good one that we recommend called awwapp.com. I think it's managed by Amazon, but it's pretty much a whiteboard app. It's a little cumbersome with the mouse. It's easier with a stylus. You could also, if you're doing an interview via Zoom, there's a whiteboard feature in Zoom, and that works great with an iPad and a stylus. So the next step is pseudocode. So this step I feel has its own challenges, and I'll explain why. So pseudo actually comes from the Greek word meaning false. So it also means like in appearance only or resembling, right? So fun fact, in classical Greek cities, being good at lying was and deception was actually considered a virtue and heroic. So a good example of that was like when Odysseus lied to the Cyclops, right? Like he was seen as a hero because he saved his men. So a lot of people, when they actually get to this step, they start writing actual code. They just don't do it on their terminal, so they think it's pseudocode. They'll say stuff like for blah, 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 do X, Y, Z, or while this is, and then especially with languages where like Python, where it's really close to English, I can see why that happens. But pseudocode should be as close to plain English as possible. Why? What if you're in some super niche like language like Swift and you're interviewing for a job that's not Swift and your recruiter doesn't know Swift and therefore they might not be able to follow along with your code, right? The pseudocode will actually let your recruiter be on the same page as you. And again, what if you're going about it wrong? They can now give you that corrective hint, right? So this is also, I tell people to format it kind of like a to-do list or a roadmap for how you're going to solve this problem. So the reason why it's so powerful is because this is the second time you're actually solving the problem. And it's another opportunity to find any bugs or edge cases and to test if your solution really works. So there's a spectrum when it comes to writing pseudocode. You can either write too much and you know you're here if your pseudocode is longer than your actual code, right? And you can also write too little where when you get to the actual coding phase, your pseudocode is useless. Like you just look at this and you're like, what am I actually supposed to do, right? So the job of pseudocode is to fundamentally jog your memory when it comes to actually writing the code part of this problem, right? It's to bridge the gap between your diagram algorithm and the actual code, right? It's an opportunity to flesh it out, the algorithm, further. So moving on, next, just we finally got to code. So the process that a lot of people have actually started with, first of all, you want to pick a language that you're actually comfortable with, right? That you'll use throughout the entire job process. If you're on site, they've already seen your resume. They know what you can do. So if what you have doesn't match up with the tech stack they're using, that's okay, right? You're good on paper at this point, right? Like they want you for a reason if you've gotten this far. So they're not gauging how well you mesh with their tech stack. They're gauging how you solve problems and how you communicate. So another thing we tell clients is when it comes to the code part is to think modularly, because sometimes you may find yourself getting stuck down a rabbit hole for a very specific problem within the problem that you're solving, right? So sometimes interviewers may just allow you to just use a function without actually coding it out. So for example, if you're working with like a min or max heap, maybe you don't have that much time and you can just ask the recruiter, can I just, right here, like bubble down or bubble up instead of like actually building the bubble up or bubble down function from scratch, right? And this is going to save you time, right? If the recruiter tells you to still code it out, that's okay because you've already demonstrated that you can think modularly, right? So next is to actually test out your solution, right? Run with the simple example case that they gave you with your code and try to eliminate any issues that you appear. And next, when you're actually talking to your recruiter, because even if you're, coding in the terminal, you should still be communicating with the interviewer what you're doing. Don't repeat yourself and write everything twice, right? That's what dry and wet stand for. The reason being is reiterating what you already said because you're trying to keep track of everything that you're supposed to do doesn't come across as effective communication. So that's why you have your diagram and your pseudocode to back you up. You've already written how to solve this problem twice. So use those two things to keep track of what you're communicating to the recruiter as you write your code. And lastly is to just be engaging. You don't want to talk just for the sake of talking. Don't mumble to yourself or in general. Don't face the board the entire time. Lastly, help them understand your approach to this problem. So check in with your interviewers from time to time. Remember that the communication aspect is not just a one-way street. So like I said before, if you need those clarifying questions, feel free to ask them. And lastly, this is really important for people who are faced with the problem that initially they have no idea how to approach it. It's okay to have a moment of silence in the start of the problem solving process, right? Just make sure that you make that aware to the interview that you need that second, right? Like if I was out with you and we were getting a beer and you're like, hey, Carlos, how have you been? And if my dog died and my partner left me and I lost all my retirements in the stock market, it's a lot of stuff, right? And I might say like, wow, it's been a long week. Let me take a minute to like process it and tell you about it, right? Versus if I just stood there for 5 minutes looking at my beer, that's really uncomfortable for all parties involved, right? So make sure you let your recruiter know that you just need that minute to think things through. So some other common problems, and this is where I'd write it on the general side of your notebook. Problems that we tend to see that our clients that bring up is, what if I panic, right? So own the problem. And what I mean by that is, I'm not saying from a responsibility perspective, although you should. I'm saying is, don't let the problem take hold of you and your emotions, right? If you start to get panic, or if you feel like you have imposter syndrome or something else, slow down and take a step back. So another fun fact for y'all, the system that kicks in during your fight or flight response is called the sympathetic nervous system. So you can actually trick it into thinking you're okay by controlling your breaths. So the average person takes anywhere from like 12 to 20 breaths a minute, but cutting it back to like even just 6 breaths a minute drastically reduces your heart rate and makes people feel more relaxed. All the hype behind deep breathing is actually backed by science. So if you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, like I said in the beginning, take that second, tell the recruiter, take a deep, slow breath. And, it'll, maybe 2 or 3 will help your brain into thinking you're not in danger, quote unquote, with that fight or flight, and you'll start to feel more relaxed. And again, if you, for example, don't know the optimal solution, mentioning the brute force approach is even better than nothing else, right? So no saying I'm stuck. So with this, what we mean is, like I said before, if you don't know what hexadecimal means or how it's represented, feel free to ask that. But if you don't know how to specifically solve a problem, don't just say, hey, can I get a hint? Instead, describe what you're trying to do and ask for advice. So for example, I understand that we're looking to do a BFS approach here, but I'm not sure how exactly to go about it. Do you have a suggestion maybe? That's way better than saying, hey, give me a free handout for help right now with this test or with this problem. So another thing that is worth touching upon is, what if you've seen this problem before, right? So the short answer is, let your interviewer know. The long answer is, you should let them know because, one, integrity, right? Any notion of dishonesty during the interview process can be instant ground for disqualification. So if the interviewee catches a whiff that you've seen this problem before and that you didn't tell them about it, they might view that as dishonest, right? Secondly, it's to help you progress further. Like, you might be given additional time for a harder question, right? And that's only going to be more beneficial to you to have more time because they have to give you a backup question. So another thing to really keep in mind is, be certain that you know 100% how to do the problem before you say that. Otherwise, say, I've seen something similar to this problem before, right? Because it does no service to you to say, I've seen this problem before and it was on LeetCode like 5 years ago when you were last job searching, right? Because you definitely won't remember how to do that, right? So tell them that you've seen something similar before. And sometimes the interviewer may just say, hey, that's fine, solve it anyway. And that's great because you've done your part in being forthcoming. So just go forth and conquer. So just to summarize, because I know we touched upon a lot of points, and I actually want to also walk you through a sample, really easy problem on how you should whiteboard that. So for the summary part, I just want you to remember that coding first is setting yourself up for failure, right? Because you have to manage a code base while you're also trying to create an algorithm or solve a problem. Remember the 4 steps. So again, they're understanding, diagramming, pseudocode, which is not the same thing as code, and then code, right? Remember what the process is about, right? How you, it's about you showcasing your style of communication and how you deal with pressure when you're solving a problem. And always be communicating. It's not just talking, but also engagement. Tell them your thoughts, but also tell them if you need a minute to gather those thoughts. And whiteboarding is a skill, just like anything else, and you only get good at stuff by practicing it. There's actually this quote that my nephew from a show that he really loves, Adventure Time, where one of the characters says to the protagonist, like, sucking at something is the first step at being sort of good at something, right? So everyone is not good when they start out, right? You only get better by practice. Things are hard until they're not, right? So what we focus on at Outco is not so much the knowledge transfer, because a lot of this that I'm sharing, you could find online if you did enough Google searches. Instead, we focus on developing those skills and putting them into practice, right? There's this concept called the 4 stages of learning, where stage 1 is you're doing something wrong and you're not even aware that you're doing it wrong, right? Step 2 is you're doing something wrong and you're aware, like, oh, I shouldn't be doing that. Oh man, I forgot. Step 3 is where you're doing something right, but it's a cognizant effort. You have to tell yourself, like, don't forget to do this. Oh yeah, and then do that, X, Y, and Z. And then stage 4 is you do stuff right without even having to think about, without even having to think about it, right? It's second nature. So we really strive to help get you to stage 3 or 4 at least, right? So, and you can only get there with practice. So, like I said, use interviewing.io to practice these things, or, practice with peers, because it's only going to get better the more you do it. So we're going to have an example walkthrough. So this is a problem that we actually give out outcoders. So I'll read the problem to you. Count the number of unique paths to travel from the top left square, so actually top left from your perspective, to the bottom right of a lattice of m by n squares. When you move through the lattice, you can only go down or go to the right. So a lot of people here, for example, might be, I don't know what a lattice is. So asking that question is totally fine. And you're given an example input and output. So if you had a 3x2 grid, you would have 10 paths, right? So we've asked, we're going to go through the 4 steps and I'll show you how. So step 1 is understanding. Ask for constraints, right? Like anything that you can think of, you should be writing down. So the time complexity of this is 2 to the n. And since talking about spatial recursion is tricky, we're not going to focus on that, but they graciously gave us a really generous time complexity. So next is, how did we get the 10 paths that we saw as a sample output? And I'll highlight that later. And then think of any edge cases that you can think of, right? So like, what if you step out of bounds of the lattice? Is that valid? What should you do then? What should you return? And anything else you can think of, right? So for example, right now, given the time complexity, recursion seems to be something that's jumping out to me immediately as a possible way to approach it, right? So going from there, I feel like I have a good understanding of the problem and I know what the constraints and possible edge cases might be. So to further understand it more, I'm going to diagram the 10 paths and how I would go about solving this problem. So here are the 10 paths. I know this is not super easy to see from your perspective because there's a lot of overlapping colors. I'm actually going to use a pointer to showcase. So you can go all the way here. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, snap. And I'm missing 2 now. See, this is why diagram is important. Let me do this one more time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, snap. I'm sorry. I clicked on the wrong thing. There are 10 paths. Trust me. I'm sorry. I haven't looked at this problem in a long time, but there are 10 paths. And the next step that I would do is, because we're using recursion, we have to keep in mind that when you're ever at a vertex between these lattices, you can only go down or to the right, right? So I would start drawing a tree that showcases all the different paths that I can take at each possible point. So as you can see on the left side, I'm recursing down. And then eventually I get to the point where, where I go beyond the bounds, right? And I've highlighted that that's not a valid path. But if I go up the tree just by 1, I can see that there is a possible route that takes me to a valid solution. And that's what I want to keep in mind as something to return as valid. So for the actual pseudocode part, I'm going to treat this like a to-do list, right? So I'm going to think of what are all the steps that I need to take in order to solve this problem. And we already said we're going to use recursion. So the first step is I'm going to use a coordinate system to represent how I traverse the lattice, right? So if you remember before, we used like 3,2 as a starting point and 0,0 as the endpoint. So the next thing is, what are all the base cases that I can think of for my recursive call? So one is if I hit 0,0, that's a valid path. So I should return a 1. But if I step out of bounds, so if I go negative in any of the directions, I should return a 0, right? So those should be the 2 cases that terminate the recursive call. Otherwise, keep calm and recurse on. Sorry. So the next step would be to code, right? So you're going to use your diagram and code, pseudocode, to guide you for this process. So steps 1 and 2. As you can see, I've defined a simple function. I started making the base cases that I mentioned before. As we progress along, we're going to run the simple example that we were given with our code and try to eliminate any issues that we appear, which is right here, sorry. So we have the 2 base cases and we have the recursive call, and we're going to try running it and see if we get the desired input. So as you can see, oh snap, there are 10 paths. See, I told you there were 10. I may not have been able to count it right now, but I guarantee that there are 10. So this would be an example of the steps at which I would start communicating to the recruiter what I'm doing while I'm typing on the terminal, right? Obviously, this is a very fast walkthrough of whiteboarding, but all the points where you saw me pause or a different screenshot would show up, those are the moments where you want to remember that you're still having a conversation with someone, right? So those are the moments that you should take a second to step away from the problem and communicate what you're doing. So that's pretty much my whole bit on how to whiteboard effectively. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat and I'll do my best to address them. Thank you, and we really appreciate you listening so much. Also, if you don't mind, help a small business out. Leave us a review on Yelp. We would greatly appreciate it. Yeah, let's get all those jobs.
Get all the jobs. Good job, Carlos. Thank you for presenting. Thank you, everybody here, for listening. And we look forward to hearing what you guys think about the presentation. Catch you guys at the next one.
Take care.
Peace out.